Disposal systems have endpoints. Every route must terminate, destruction, retention, transfer to third-party certified facilities in language their insurers understand. This is standard. What is not standard is a route that terminates somewhere. Not nowhere. Somewhere. Our place. The audit trail does not corrupt. It arrives. Between archived roots and trees that grew where columns should be, something moves through the negative space. It has been learning where to look. I thought I had found a disposal fraud scheme. That was the first mistake. The second was believing that the numbers were wrong because someone had become careless. I had worked at R Epoch long enough to know better than that. R Epoch did not become careless. Carelessness left stains, signatures, budget trails, recovery tickets, idle equipment reservations, and 6 different employees who could truthfully say they had only followed the version of the procedure visible to them. Carelessness was messy in a human way. What I found was clean. My name is Matt Keir. At the time, my badge said Disposal Reconciliation, Analyst, Environmental Recovery and Materials Accounting. That sounds like a job invented to make people stop asking what I did, which made it unusually honest. I reconciled what went into R Epoch's disposal systems with what came out of them, what was billed against them, what was marked as recovered, what was marked as unrecoverable, and what got transformed into those phrases no one outside the company could read without their eyes sliding off the page. Recovered biological material. Incident, adjacent waste. Non-public environmental removal. Archive retention, exception. Unverified animal remains. No guest exposure. Most of my work was not dramatic. A freezer unit failed. A juvenile animal died in transit. A cleaning contractor mislabeled contaminated substrate. A guest dropped a medication pack into a restricted landscape planter, and the whole bed had to be treated as mixed hazardous recovery until legal decided how frightened the word hazardous should sound in internal paperwork. I did not handle the animals. I did not walk around with a tranquilizer rifle. I did not stand in misty paddocks staring nobly at impossible creatures. I sat in a windowless office and made sure one column could explain another. That was why the first discrepancy annoyed me before it frightened me. It was a body count problem, but not the kind that word suggests. A body count in my department did not mean people. It meant mass, remains, fragments, sampled tissue, damaged eggs, carcass portions, contaminated feed, failed culture batches, and any living material that had stopped being useful in a way R Epoch could sell. Every disposal path had to end somewhere. Thermal reduction, chemical stabilization, deep holding, environmental return, archive retention, third-party certified destruction, which meant we paid someone outside the company to tell us the thing was gone in language their insurer understood. A line item from nursery return support showed 17 sealed biological containers moving out of a restricted recovery bay after a power incident. The corresponding destruction certificate listed 12. The environmental removal invoice billed for 12. The internal animal inventory adjustment accounted for 12. The other 5 had been closed, not destroyed, not transferred, not retained, closed. It was a tiny word in a quiet cell, the kind of word that appears in a database because someone up the chain does not want the software asking follow-up questions. I flagged it as a reconciliation exception. That was normal. My supervisor, if he saw it at all, would route it to the relevant operations group, who would send back a correction packet explaining that the 5 missing containers had been duplicate scan entries, or moisture-adjusted mass corrections, or non-biological packaging that did not require downstream biological accounting. The explanation would be boring, and I would accept it because boredom is how a system proves it is healthy. The explanation came back in 11 minutes. That was too fast. It said the containers had been reassigned under disposal route integrity review and required no further reconciliation. There were 3 problems with that. First, I had never seen a disposal route integrity review close an exception without naming a route. Second, the attached authorization belonged to a department I could not access. Third, the template code was old, not obsolete, not archived. Old in a way that meant it had survived several platform migrations because someone had cared enough to keep it working while everything else changed around it. I told myself it was a records artifact. Then I found the same phrase attached to a chemical spill from an exhibit service tunnel. Then a missing drone recovery package. Then 3 audio drives from a guest incident review. Then a batch of environmental soil cores that had been pulled after a maintenance report mentioned odor, vibration, and unexpected subsidence beneath a staff. Only access path. Closed, 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 closed. Each case made sense alone. That was the genius of it. A death in one system. A waste transfer in another. A privacy retention exception somewhere else. A damaged drive that could not be restored. A settlement packet with its attachments removed. A veterinary remnant after an animal did not survive a procedure whose public-facing name involved welfare assessment and whose private file involved emergency restraint damage. No one person had to see the pattern. I was not supposed to see the pattern. My job existed because R Epoch had become too large for one department's lies to stay neatly inside that department. Finance wanted numbers. Environmental wanted weights. Animal operations wanted categories. Legal wanted words that could survive discovery. Guest experience wanted nothing that sounded like animals died where children could buy snow cones. My team sat in the scene between those wants and pretended reconciliation was neutral. For 3 weeks, I stayed late and pulled old closures into a private cross-system file. I told myself it was professional caution. I told myself I was protecting my own word product. If someone came back later and asked why I had accepted an unexplained closure, I wanted to be able to show that I had noticed. That was the adult, cowardly, practical reason. I had rent. I had a loan from the master's program I had not finished. I had a mother who still told people I worked in conservation accounting because it sounded better than dinosaur waste paperwork. I had no plan to become a whistleblower. Whistleblower is a word people give you after you have already lost access to every normal exit. The file grew. Animal inventory discrepancies, disposal manifests, incident waste, environmental recovery, archive retention exceptions, body remains accounting, a cluster of records from different years, different facilities, different managers, different official causes. Nothing matched directly. That was the point. The containers never left by the same door twice. A missing drive would be paired with an animal mass correction 2 months later. A soil core exception would sit beside a closed guest claim that should never have touched environmental accounting. A disposal manifest would list palletized non-biological archive debris, and the weight would match, within 6 kilos, the missing recovered tissue from a completely separate incident. I kept expecting the pattern to become fraud. Fraud would have comforted me. Fraud has motives, I understand. Money leaves fingerprints. People sell things. People hide losses. People move bodies where regulators cannot count them. People do stupid, greedy, ordinary things and then write memoranda to make those things look inevitable. This did not look greedy. It looked like there was a place in the records where consequences went to stop being consequences. The night before the secure interview, I printed 42 pages. That was not smart, but fear makes people nostalgic for paper. Printed manifests, exception summaries, route integrity closures, and one screenshot of a directory I had accessed for exactly 4 seconds before my credentials dropped me out of the system. The screenshot showed a plain folder tree with a small icon beside one label. The icon looked almost cute, the way internal software icons looked when a designer had been told to make dangerous infrastructure approachable. A little fossil bone shape. Like a cartoon dog bone, if the dog had died before mammals learned the trick. Paleosystems, disposal route, integrity review. Under it, one subfolder had opened far enough for me to see 3 words before the session ended. Transfer space accounting. I sat there with the printer breathing warm paper into the tray and told myself transfer space was logistics language. A staging area. A secure holding zone. A place where items waited between disposal states. R Epoch loved making ordinary movement sound like theology. Then my work phone buzzed. The notification was calm, grey, and perfectly formatted. Access, reconciliation required, secure interview, room B14, tomorrow 09003, attendance mandatory for credential continuity. There was no threat in it, no accusation, no mention of the file I had built, no warning that my searches had been flagged or my print job logged or my badge history reviewed. That was what made my hands go cold. R Epoch never threatened you when it already had you in a process. I did not sleep much that night. That is what people say when they mean they slept in pieces, but I mean I did not sleep. I lay on my sofa because going to bed would have made the night feel normal, and I watched the ceiling change from black to the cheap grey of early morning. Every hour or so, I unlocked my personal phone and looked at photographs of the printed pages spread across my kitchen table, then hated myself for taking photographs of printed pages I had made because I was afraid of digital tracking. I put the originals in a grocery bag under a bag of rice in the back of my pantry. That was my emergency plan. I am telling you this so you understand I was not heroic. Heroes make copies and call reporters. Heroes contact regulators. Heroes write letters that begin, "If you are reading this, something has happened to me." I moved 42 pages 6 feet away from my kitchen table and hid them under basmati rice because I could not decide whether I was overreacting. Paul, at 082, my badge still worked at the employee transit gate. That made me feel stupid for being afraid. At 8026, the coffee kiosk charged my account and printed my name on the side of a compostable cup. That made me feel safer than it should have. At W879, my workstation accepted my credentials, but opened only a restricted desktop with 3 available icons: Message Center, Credential Continuity, and Visitor Safety Training Refresher. The last one made me laugh once, loud enough that Anika from procurement looked over the divider. "You all right?" she asked. "Access review," I said. She made a sympathetic face, the face people made when R Epoch Systems decided you had personally offended a login server. Those are miserable. Mine took 2 hours because my old emergency contact still had my married name. That helped. Ordinary explanations are sedatives. Message Center contained one notice. Your access profile has been placed under temporary continuity, hold pending reconciliation interview. Please do not attempt non-essential cross-system retrieval until review is complete. This does not indicate disciplinary status. That last sentence was the kind of sentence that tells you exactly what everyone has decided not to say. At Sesto 9 Thursto VA, a woman I had never seen before appeared at the entrance to our bay. She wore a grey R Epoch jacket without a department patch. Not security black. Not operations blue. Grey, like she belonged to the hallway more than any office. Matthew Keir. No one called me Matthew unless they were reading from a system record. I stood up too quickly and almost knocked over the coffee I had not touched. Anika looked down at her screen. 2 other people did the same. That is one of the first things an institution teaches you, how to give someone privacy when privacy is no longer possible. The woman gave me a small smile. "I'm here for your access reconciliation appointment." "I know where B14 is," I said. "I'm sure." She did not move. Continuity review requires escorted routing once a credential hold is active. Escorted routing. Not detained. Not collected. Escorted routing. I locked my restricted desktop because my hands wanted something to do. The woman watched me do it without appearing to watch. "Do I need to bring anything?" I asked. "Just your badge." "Should I bring my work phone?" "It will remain in your possession unless the interview lead requests temporary isolation." Temporary isolation sounded like something done to a device, not a person. I put the phone in my pocket anyway. The hallway outside environmental recovery smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and warm dust from the floor vents. Nothing looked different. That was the cruelty of it. Employees passed with lanyards, breakfast containers, tablet cases, rolled habitat maps, a crate of replacement shoe covers for some guest-facing lab. Somewhere beyond the staff wall, people were probably standing in lines with children and sunblock, waiting to be told that the past had been made safe enough to photograph. We turned away from the main administrative spine before the elevators. "B14 is downstairs," I said. "B14 has been reassigned for credential continuity interviews today." "To where?" "Secure Interview Suite C." Suite was another one of those words. Rooms were where things happened. Suites were where things were managed. I thought about refusing. That is embarrassing to write, because refusal did not occur to me as an action so much as an image. Me stopping in the hallway, asking for representation, demanding a supervisor, making everyone look. But my badge was on continuity hold. My workstation was restricted. I had printed documents I was not supposed to print, hidden in my apartment under rice. And the woman beside me had not accused me of anything. She had only given me the next step in a process. Processes are difficult to disobey because each step is too small to justify panic. We passed 2 more doors, then a checkpoint I had seen only from the outside. The reader panel flashed amber when she presented her badge and green when I presented mine. That made me feel a ridiculous pulse of relief. If they intended to fire me, surely my badge would not open secure doors. If they intended to arrest me, surely there would be more people. If they intended to disappear me, surely the hallway would not be so clean. I know how that sounds. Secure Interview Suite C had a small reception space with no receptionist. The chairs were low and comfortable. A wall screen displayed R Epoch's current employee wellness campaign, Clarity Supports Safety. Beneath it, a smaller line read, "Report access irregularities promptly to protect yourself and your team." The grey jacket woman gestured toward a side room. "You can wait in here." The room contained a table, 2 chairs, a camera dome, a water carafe, and a matte black box on the table with a shallow tray molded into its top. "For personal electronics," she said. "You said my phone would remain with me." "It will remain in the room with you unless isolation is requested. Please place it in the tray for the duration of preliminary alignment." Alignment with what? Interview systems. I should have walked out. I should have at least asked for the policy number. Instead, I put my work phone in the tray because preliminary alignment sounded like a wireless recording interference issue, and because the tray was on my side of the table, and because I could still see the phone. The black box made a soft click. The screen went dark. I looked at the woman. She was still smiling politely and without effort. "The interview lead will be with you shortly." She left, and the door sealed with a sound too heavy for an interview room. For about 2 minutes, nothing happened. I know because I counted breaths. I tried the door after 30 of them. It did not open. There was no handle, only a vertical seam and a small square of dark glass at shoulder height. I told myself secure interview rooms lock automatically when electronics isolation is active. I told myself the camera dome meant they would not do anything improper. I told myself improper was a legal word, and R Epoch avoided legal words inside rooms where cameras watched employees wait. At breath 94, the table speaker came on. Matthew Keir, this is a credential continuity review. For your safety and ours, please remain seated until the room has completed atmospheric verification. Atmospheric verification. I looked at the ceiling vents. Is there a problem? I asked. The speaker did not answer. A smell entered the room. Not gas in the dramatic way you imagine gas. No hiss. No colored cloud. A sweet medicinal flatness under the citrus cleaner, like a hospital corridor after someone had wiped down a spill. I stood up. The camera dome tilted with a barely audible motor sound. Please remain seated, the speaker said. Movement may extend the verification interval. That was when fear finally stopped pretending to be confusion. I grabbed the black box and tried to lift it. It had locked to the table. My phone was under the clear lid, screen black, unreachable. I hit the lid with the heel of my hand. Once, twice. The sound it made was small and humiliating. The room tilted, not dramatically. It just became harder to prove that the floor was where I remembered it being. I put one hand on the table and one on the chair. The tabletop felt cool, then very far away. I remember thinking I should hold my breath, but the thought arrived late from a version of me still sitting in the previous minute. The speaker said something else. It may have been, "Thank you for maintaining review posture." It may have been, "Transfer clearance confirmed." It may have been neither. My knees hit the floor. The impact barely hurt. That frightened me more than pain would have. The last thing I saw in Secure Interview Suite C was the wellness message on the wall screen through the glass slit of the door, reflected backward and cut into pieces by the scene. Clarity supports safety. Then the room went away. I did. I woke to metal under my cheek. For a while, that was the entire world. Cold metal, the taste of something bitter at the back of my throat, and a white bar of light above me that looked too sharp to be hospital lighting. My first thought was that I had fallen out of the chair in the interview room. My second was that the floor beneath me had a pattern. Not carpet, not tile, not the polished poured surface of Secure Interview Suite C. Industrial grating, square and rough enough to print itself into my cheek. I pushed myself up too fast and nearly vomited. The room waited for me to become useful again. It was rectangular, windowless, and larger than the interview room, but not large enough to feel like storage. The walls were brushed metal panels, each one fitted so tightly to the next that the seams looked drawn rather than assembled. A long fluorescent fixture ran overhead behind a protective cage. The air was cold and very dry. Somewhere behind the wall, something moved air through a filter with the low patience of machinery designed never to be noticed. There was a door. That mattered to me so much I almost laughed. A door means a room. A room means outside the room exists. It was set into the right-hand wall, broad and flat, with 3 circular locking housings stacked vertically beside the scene. Not exactly a vault door. Not exactly a blast door. But close enough that my mind supplied the comparison and then rejected it because the room was too clean, too corporate, too calm. No handle. I crawled toward it before I trusted my legs. My fingertips found no edge I could use. The seam was real, but the door belonged to whoever controlled the other side of it. Hello? My voice sounded smaller than the room should have allowed. No answer. My work phone was gone. My badge was gone. My belt was still on. My shoes were still on. They had left my watch, but the screen showed only a black square with a pale loading ring that did not move. I pressed the side button until my thumbnail hurt. Nothing. When I finally stood, the room swayed once and then settled. There were markings on the floor, a muted blue arc painted directly onto the grating, following a wide circle that took up most of the room's center. Parts of the line disappeared beneath the central object. I'd avoided looking at it. That was not conscious. It was the way you avoid looking at an injury on your own body until you have prepared yourself to learn how bad it is. At the center of the chamber stood a slab of stone. It was taller than I was, and roughly rectangular, pale grey, white with uneven edges, as if a section of ancient seabed had been cut out and stood upright. Not polished, not displayed. It had shells in it. Spiral fossils like curled fists. Fern impressions. Tiny blank pits. Long, thin scratches that might have been plant stems or bone fragments or cracks. The surface held too many kinds of age at once. The room did not look old. The stone did. That contrast made my skin tighten. Everything around it was engineered. Metal panels, grating, locking systems, filtered air, caged light. The slab did not match any of it. It looked less displayed than contained, and containment made less sense than display. Behind it, printed low on the metal wall in black, were words I had to step sideways to read because the slab blocked half the line. Maintain clearance 7 SAURIAN transfer space. The first word I understood. The second I almost understood. The third I did not. Urian. Tear. It did not sound like a department. It did not sound like a disposal vendor. It sounded like a name chosen by someone who believed acronyms could make fear professional. On the right wall, near the sealed door, another label sat at chest height. Do not obstruct transfer face. I read it 3 times, and each time chose the less frightening interpretation. Transfer face could mean the front of a transfer unit, the face of a panel, a reference surface used for alignment. It did not have to mean the stone. It especially did not have to mean the stone could do anything. Closer to the floor, just outside the blue arc, a small stencil read, Reference surface, visual inspection, only authorized staff, contact-free review. Visual inspection, contact-free review. Maintenance language, facility language. Boring words lined up in a way that left exactly one interesting object in the room. That was the trick, though I did not see it yet. I walked the perimeter first. The blue arc did not reach the walls. There was a narrow path around it, wide enough for a person to stand with their back to metal and stare at the slab without crossing the line. I did that for several minutes, moving from panel to panel, checking seams, vents, light fixture, door, any possible camera. There were 2 small black lenses in opposite corners. I stared into both. My name is Matt Keir, I said. I am an employee. I am requesting immediate access to medical review and representation. The room filtered air. I do not consent to this interview condition. Nothing. I tried the door again. I tried shouting. I kicked the lower panel until pain went up my leg. The door absorbed the sound and gave back almost nothing. I examined the locking housings, then the wall seams, then the grating near the vents. No screws. No panel releases. No tool access. No loose edge. The place had been designed by people who understood that trapped people search for corners. Eventually, every search led my eyes back to the slab. I found myself studying the fossils because they were the only details that did not repeat. A fern was pressed into the upper right, like a delicate mistake. 3 spiral shells sat in a diagonal near the center. A narrow, dark inclusion crossed the stone just below eye level, so straight I first thought it was a crack. Then I realized it was not a crack. It was a seam. No. I told myself that immediately. Stone has lines. Stone has layers. Sediment forms in planes. Fossils settle. Pressure breaks things. There was no reason a seam had to mean anything. My head hurt. My mouth was dry. The sweet medicinal smell still lived inside my nose. I checked my watch again. The loading ring remained frozen. I looked for a water source and found none. That was when I crossed a blue line for the first time. Not all the way. Just 1 foot, because I wanted to read a scuffed marking on the inner edge of the circle. It was partly worn away, but I could make out min, clearance, and 2.5 m during root activity. Root activity. Another phrase from the documents. Another euphemism pretending the dangerous part was motion, not destination. A pressure touched my ears. I stepped back. The pressure vanished. I stood there, breathing too fast, one foot inside the line, one outside it, like a child playing a game with rules that had become serious after the fact. The stone did nothing. That should have comforted me. Instead, I began to understand that the room did not need to do anything quickly. It had no chair, no water, no visible intercom, no handle, no human response. It had time. It had one object. It had labels that told trained people how not to die, and untrained people almost nothing useful. The only thing in the room that looked capable of meaning anything was a thing I was not supposed to get close to. I stayed outside the line for as long as pride could hold me there. Then I walked back in. The pressure returned, deeper this time, like an elevator beginning to move before the floor followed. The fluorescent light hummed harder. The fossils seemed sharper, every shell ridge and fern vein suddenly clean enough to cut thought around itself. I reached toward the dark, straight line in the slab. I did not touch it. I want that recorded, if anything I say can be recorded. I did not touch it. My fingers stopped several inches from the stone. I was trying to feel heat, vibration, airflow, anything that would prove there was a mechanism hidden behind it. The line brightened. Not the slab. Not the room. 5. The line. A narrow yellow-white thread appeared in the stone, too straight to belong there, cutting between a shell and a fern impression, as if the rock had been waiting for someone to remind it where to divide. I stepped back. The floor did not step back with me. For a second, my body knew exactly where it was, and the room disagreed. The fossils stayed still. The space between them stopped being stone. The first color was yellow. That is important, because it was not the color of the place. I know that now. It was the color my eyes chose while they were failing. Bright, flat, cheap yellow, the color of hazard tape under bad fluorescent light, the color of warning signs and old institutional carpet, and every photograph people pass around when they want to prove they know what a liminal space is supposed to look like. For 1 second, maybe less, I thought I had fallen into a hallway made of that color. Then my sight began to recover. The yellow thinned. It did not switch off. It drained backward, like something overexposed correcting itself after the camera finally admitted the exposure was wrong. The walls beneath it became green. Not green light on white walls. Not paint. Not glow from hidden strips. The material itself was green, violently and calmly at once, a color too bright to be natural and too consistent to be decorative. It was not lit green. It was green, the way metal is metal. I was on my knees. That was the next fact. My palms pressed against a glossy brown floor that looked wet until I realized the shine was inside it. It had the sealed slickness of a garage epoxy coating, but the color was dirt, dark brown, uneven, flecked with pale chips and mineral specks that caught the green from the walls. White, gold, something gray like ground shell. Artificial dirt. Preserved mud. A floor pretending to be ground and doing it badly enough that the wrongness became a texture. I looked back for the chamber. There was no chamber. There was a corridor. The walls rose on both sides in blocky luminous sections, squared and repeated, with deep rectangular openings cut into them at regular intervals. The openings were black. Not shadowed runes exactly. Not doorways exactly. Spaces between structures, like the gaps between ribs. Some were tall enough for a person. Some began too high or too low. One on my right was only a dark slot at knee height, and the green around it was as smooth as poured glass. There was no ceiling. Above the walls hung a black void. No beams, no ductwork, no sky, no moon, no stars, no roof, no suggestion that the corridor belonged inside a building or outside one. The walls simply rose to a height and stopped, as if whatever made them had understood enclosure but not shelter. Thin vines hung from the upper edges in scattered lines. They were not lush. They were not jungle. They looked like someone had drawn plant life into the scene late, sparingly, after deciding the architecture was too clean to be honest. A few strands trailed down the green walls. One touched the glossy brown floor and vanished into its reflection without making a ripple. I stood too quickly and the corridor doubled. Not split, doubled. For a moment, I saw every wall once upright and once under my feet, every opening repeated in the floor sheen. I shut my eyes. Yellow swam behind my lids. When I opened them again, the green had settled deeper, darker at the edges, brighter where the corridor narrowed ahead. Yellow. The sound did not echo the way it should have. It traveled forward and then seemed to be taken apart by the openings along the sides. A piece of it came back from my left, lower and slower, as if someone had tried to say hello through a mouth that had never learned the word. I did not call again. My first useful instinct was the watch. Still black. Then pockets. No phone, no badge, no keys. The people who put me in the chamber had taken everything except my clothes, my shoes, and the feeling that I had somehow made a professional mistake large enough to become physical. I chose a direction because standing still felt like agreeing to stay there. The corridor looked identical both ways, but one end seemed darker. I went the other direction. After 20 steps, I looked back. The place I had started was gone. You cast, not completely. That is the worst part. It was almost there. A section of wall behind me had the same arrangement of openings. A vine hung where I remembered a vine. The floor held the same pale flecks, but the spacing had changed. The corridor had not rearranged itself dramatically. It had corrected small details, the way a document refreshes after a hidden filter is applied. I walked back anyway. 30 steps. Halt. The air stayed still. The green stayed green. The black overhead stayed too empty. I reached the section that should have held the start, and there was only another opening on the left, taller than the others, with rough stone visible beyond the luminous frame. Dark rock, ferns, a rectangular block set into a wall of earth, as if someone had tried to install architecture into a cave and stopped halfway. I did not enter. I am not proud of many decisions I made there, but I am proud of that one. Instead, I tore a strip from the hem of my shirt and tied it around a hanging vine. I walked forward again, counting steps under my breath. At 60, I stopped and looked back. The strip was visible, small and pale against the green. At 90, it was gone behind a bend I had not noticed making. At 120, the corridor was straight again, and the strip hung on a vine in front of me. For a moment, I thought I had looped. Then I saw the knot. I tie knots badly. Always have. This knot was not mine. It was too neat, turned the opposite way, and the torn cloth was darker than it should have been, as if it had been wet and dried in an hour I had not lived through. I backed away from it until my shoulder hit the wall. The wall was warm. Not body warm. Not machine warm. Material warm, like stone after sun, except there was no sun. I pressed my palm to it because some stupid part of me wanted to learn whether it had a pulse. The surface was smooth where it looked smooth, but under the smoothness I felt faint irregularities, panels too wide to be tiles and too regular to be stone. Human order in a material that had never agreed to be human. The opening beside me was dark enough that the green stopped at its edge. Something moved inside it. I did not see an animal. That would be simpler to say and less true. I saw a body problem. A suggestion of a narrow head and a back line, then legs placed wrong by the angle, then nothing. In the brightest green beyond the opening, the shape broke apart. In the dark within the side space, it almost became a creature. I held still. The thing did too, or the darkness did, or my eyes found a pattern and refused to give it back. Predator. That word arrived before dinosaur, before animal, before any rational thought about impossible corridors. Predator is older than workplace fear, older than language. My body understood the dark opening better than my mind understood the walls. I moved slowly away from it. The glossy floor made my reflection move under me, thinner and greener than I was. For several steps I thought another person walked beneath the surface. Then the reflection lost my shape, becoming only a vertical smear between the walls. The first sign appeared after what I guessed was 10 minutes. It was bolted to the side of a green panel with 4 clean metal fasteners. Root integrity, notice unverified, human-facing space, do not follow repeated openings. I laughed. I could not help it. The sound came out sharp and ugly, then died in the side corridors. Human-facing space. That was the phrase that changed my fear. Until then, I had been afraid because the place was impossible. After the sign, I understood someone else had been afraid here before me and had tried to make impossible into a category. Unverified human-facing space meant there were spaces that looked arranged for humans but were not. It meant the corridor could imitate usefulness. It meant the openings might not be doors just because a human body could fit through them. I kept walking. The green brightened ahead. My eyes watered. I blinked until the color corrected. Then my watch vibrated. I nearly screamed. The screen had come alive. Not fully. It showed 09,031, then 14,008, then a date 3 days earlier, then only a row of square characters. The battery icon went from 82% to 19% while I watched. A map grid flashed behind the numbers, blue and white, then rotated until north pointed everywhere. A notification appeared. No location found. Then another. Location updated. Then the screen showed a single pin in the middle of an empty ocean. The battery dropped to 3%. I held the watch close to my face as if proximity could make it honest. A camera icon appeared, though my watch had no camera. For one frame, reflected in the black glass, something stood behind me where the corridor should have been empty. When I turned, the corridor held only green walls and hanging vines. The watch died. Far ahead, from one of the openings, came a sound like a filing cabinet closing underwater. Then another. Then a voice, or the shape of one, too faint to understand. I followed it because it was the first sound in that place that had not seemed interested in me. The sound did not stay in front of me. That was the first rule I learned by accident. Direction in that place was not a promise. It was a suggestion the space could withdraw. A metallic thump would come from the corridor ahead, then from a side opening behind me, then from somewhere overhead where there was nothing but black. Each time I stopped, the silence arranged itself around me as if waiting to see what kind of animal I would become. I kept one hand on the left wall. That was what people do in mazes. That was what I knew from childhood puzzles, emergency drills, training videos where smoke-filled corridors remained politely obedient to geometry. Keep one hand on a wall and eventually the wall gives you an exit. After a while, the wall gave me my own sleeve. I found another strip of cloth tied around a vine. Mine, this time. I knew because the knot was bad and because one thread was still damp from my mouth where I had torn it. The strip hung ahead of me on the left wall, though I had never taken my hand off that same wall long enough to circle back. I stood there with my fingers against the green surface and understood that the left-hand rule assumed the wall was interested in remaining one thing. SAURIAN was not. I did not use that name yet, not as a name. It was still just a word from the chamber wall, a corporate label attached to a state of being lost too completely for loss to cover it. But the longer I walked, the more the word gathered weight. SAURIAN. Not dinosaur exactly. Not lizard. Not the animals in the parks, cleaned up for guest-facing wonder. Older than the company. Older than maps. A name R Epoch had printed onto signs, because naming a thing is the first step in pretending you can invoice its maintenance. The corridor opened into a broader stretch where the side openings became deeper, more irregular. The green frames remained squared and modular, but behind some of them the walls gave way to rough rock. Ferns grew from cracks in vertical stone. Blocks of darker material jutted at odd depths, like someone had tried to assemble a hallway out of cave sections and software assets and the memory of an exhibit queue. The floor stayed glossy brown. I crouched and touched it again. The surface was hard. It looked wet because the shine was sealed inside it, pale mineral flecks caught in the gloss. My reflection trembled when the floor did not. I wanted to call it dirt. I wanted to call it epoxy. It was both badly enough to be neither. I passed another sign. Route beacon lost. Maintain low sound transit. Avoid open visibility. The sign was printed in R Epoch black on a rectangular plate bolted into luminous green material. Below it, someone had scratched a second message by hand. Straight lines make you easy. I stared at that for a long time. Not easier to find, not easy to catch. Easy. The corridor ahead was straight, bright, and open for perhaps 200 feet. The side openings marched down both walls at regular intervals. The path seemed clearer than anything I had seen since the transfer chamber, and for that reason, I did not trust it. I went into the nearest side opening instead. The darkness inside made the green behind me look too bright, and for the first few steps, I could see almost nothing. Then the side passage resolved into a narrow service-like run with one rough stone wall and one luminous wall. Roots crossed the ceiling that was not a ceiling. They hung from above and disappeared into black before they reached anything like soil. The passage bent twice at right angles so precise they felt drawn. Something breathed in the wall. I froze. It was not behind the wall. It was not on the other side. The sound moved through the green material, the way plumbing noise moves through pipes in an old apartment, except the rhythm was slow and animal. Inhale, hold, scrape. Inhale, hold, scrape. I backed out without turning around. In the main corridor, my watch remained dead. I pressed the side button until the black screen showed the pale smudge of my thumb and nothing else. Then, without warning, it lit again. A photo library opened. My watch did not have a photo library. Images blinked past too quickly to understand. The transfer chamber floor. A fossil shell. The green corridor from above. A document page I recognized from my apartment. My own face, mouth open, eyes reflecting green. Then, a file thumbnail labeled IMG0000 appeared and duplicated itself in rows until the screen filled with identical empty squares. The battery icon said 0%. The screen stayed on. I understood then that it was not failing in a normal way. A normal device dies honestly. This was trying to interpret a place that would not remain valid long enough to be interpreted. Each function was a little agreement between the device and the world. The agreements did not hold. The screen went black again. I took off the watch and put it in my pocket. That felt like ending a conversation with someone delirious. The metallic sound returned ahead of me, clearer now. Not a filing cabinet. Drawers. Many drawers. Gliding. Closing. Opening. Paper shifting. A clatter of something light spilling onto a hard surface. Records. The thought pulled me forward harder than fear could hold me back. I found the first file label stuck to the floor. It lay beneath the glossy surface, not on top of it, as if the floor had flowed over it and sealed it in place. White rectangle. Black text. One corner browned and torn. The words were distorted by the sheen, but I could read enough. PP Rex substrate, hold non-public. A second label appeared 5 steps later, adhered to a green wall like a specimen tag. Archive retention, exception, audio media. Then a strip of barcode tape curling from a vine. Then a plastic evidence sleeve wedged in a side opening, empty except for a brown smear and a printed chain of custody line that ended before the recipient field. I was close. To what, I did not yet know. My file. My pattern. The place in the records where consequences stopped being consequences. The corridor changed around the evidence. The green walls became less clean. Their surfaces bulged and recessed around embedded objects, folders, snapped data cartridges, laminated placards, a child's dropped exhibit map so faded the cartoon animal on it had become only a smile and teeth. Some objects lay on the floor. Others protruded from the walls at impossible depths, half swallowed by green material or brown gloss. A black cassette recorder sat on a low ledge of luminous wall. For a moment, I thought it was a joke. Not a corporate recorder. Not sleek. A chunky, old handheld device with a cracked speaker grill, 2 physical buttons, and a small tape window cloudy with scratches. It looked older than my job, older than the current park branding, older than most of the containment language I knew. A strip of tape was wrapped around it with a handwritten word. Works. I picked it up. It had weight. Real weight. The plastic was cold. Inside the tape window, the reels sat unevenly, one nearly full, one nearly empty. I pressed play because, of course I did. Because every story trained you to press play, and every survival instinct I had left was tangled with the need to know whether another person had stood where I stood. At first, there was only hiss. Then a voice, warped and low. Not the camera. Don't trust the camera. If you can hear this, keep the tape moving. It catches pressure better than image. Image tries to finish the room. The voice crackled. A thump. Breathing. Do not follow repeated openings. If you see your marker ahead of you, do not retrieve it. If you see your marker behind you, do not assume you returned. The tape slowed, then surged. Green areas showed too much. Dark areas lie less. Not truth. Less. A sound like the recorder being dragged across a surface. Then the voice became a wet ribbon of consonants and stopped. I hit stop so hard the button stuck halfway down. That did not make it safe. It made it useful. I put the recorder in my pocket with the dead watch. Ahead, the corridor widened into something that was no longer a corridor. The green walls opened into staggered rectangular bays. Some were full of file boxes. Some held rusting shelving. Some were blocked by roots, broken office furniture, or piles of sealed plastic containers with R Epoch labels curling off their sides. The black overhead remained open, but the darkness above seemed lower here, leaning over the shelves. A sign hung crooked from 2 metal chains attached to nothing I could see. Disposal route, integrity review, authorized, retention, failure, field, no public safety designation. Under the printed text, someone had written in marker. They didn't destroy it. The words had run in the damp-looking shine, but not enough to hide them. They put it where it could not leave cleanly. Behind the sign, drawers opened and closed by themselves in the dark, not fast, not dramatically. Patiently. Like a place filing itself. I had imagined a hidden room. That was the wrong scale of thought. A hidden room has walls. A hidden room implies someone chose where it began and ended. What I found was an archive, the way a sinkhole is a basement, a structure only if you are desperate enough to need a word for it. The first bay held file boxes. Ordinary file boxes, the kind every office pretends it will someday scan and destroy. White cardboard. Finger holes. Black printed labels. Some were stacked neatly on metal shelving. Others had collapsed into wet-looking brown floor material that had risen around them and hardened halfway up their sides. The green walls behind them glowed through gaps in the shelving, turning the box edges the color of old teeth. The labels were from different years, different departments, different crises: biological recovery, a no guest contact incident, waste audio, hold environmental substrate, external disclosure, review, settlement support, non-retained attachments, animal remains, mass correction. The farther I walked, the less the archive respected sequence. A file from 6 months ago sat beside a folder stamped with a logo R Epoch had stopped using before I joined. A stack of thermal destruction certificates had fused with a box of guest feedback cards. A plastic evidence bin contained shredded paper, 3 teeth in separate sample tubes, a child's souvenir wristband, and a hard drive split down the middle as if something had bitten it. I took pictures with a phone I did not have. That is not a metaphor. I caught myself lifting my empty hand, thumb moving to wake a screen that was not there. My body had a learned shape for evidence, and the place exploited the absence of the tool. I stood in front of proof no sane audit would accept and felt my hand trying to become a camera. The cassette recorder bumped against my hip. I pressed record. The red light came on weakly. "My name is Matt Keir," I said, and hated how formal I sounded. "R Epoch employee, ID." I stopped. I did not remember the last 4 digits. I tried again. "I am in a disposal archive associated with disposal route, integrity review." I was routed here after a secure interview following a credential hold. Evidence present includes: a drawer opened somewhere to my left. The recorder clicked. The red light flickered but held. Evidence present includes animal remains accounting, environmental recovery records, audio media, guest claim attachments, and disposal manifests. Items appear displaced. Some records are physically embedded in the surrounding structure. There. That sounded like me. Terrified, yes, but useful. If I could remain useful, I could remain myself. I moved deeper. The archive widened into lanes divided by shelving, green wall segments, and irregular growths of rough stone. Some lanes ended in stacked boxes, some in black openings. Some looped back into themselves after a few turns, returning me to the same label with one word changed. A folder marked biological recovery became biological recurrence when I saw it the second time. I did not open that one. A terminal glowed on a desk half sunk into the glossy floor. It was old. Beige plastic, square monitor, physical keyboard with several missing keys. A cable as thick as my thumb ran from the back of it into a green wall and vanished through the material without a socket. The screen displayed amber text on black. Paleo Systems, see Disposal Route, Integrity Review. Beside the heading was the little fossil bone icon from the folder tree, harmless and stupid and suddenly so obscene I wanted to turn the monitor away. Below it, a prompt blinked. Root accounting node, partial external power, degraded local index, unreliable. I did not touch the keyboard at first. Then I saw my file name, not the name I had given it. R Epoch had assigned its own. KEIRM, SCROSS, System Exception, Cluster, She, Human Factor. Human Factor. I laughed once, and the recorder in my pocket caught the sound badly, flattening it into something that came back from the shelves as another person laughing behind me. I typed with 2 fingers because the keyboard felt brittle. Open. The terminal hesitated. The screen flickered. The cable in the wall pulsed with a faint sound like current trying to remember a path. A list appeared. 5 nursery containers. 3 audio drives. soil cores, disposal manifests, a missing containment technician, 2 guest medical scans, a sealed settlement addendum, a line labeled non-public body material human, followed by a question mark that had been struck through and restored so many times it looked like a wound in the text. Every item had the same final status: root exclusion complete, not destroyed, not resolved, not disposed, excluded. The terminal clicked and began printing through a dot matrix printer I had not noticed under the desk. The sound was absurdly cheerful. A thin strip of paper crawled out, line by line, while the archive breathed around me. I tore the paper free before it finished. The bottom line stopped halfway through a word. Transfer. Return, not gua. The printer kept trying to print onto nothing. I folded the paper and put it inside my shirt. Then I started making the packet. There is no dignified way to describe that part. I stole from the dead, the missing, the legally erased, the maybe never alive. I took 1 torn disposal manifest with a root exclusion stamp. I took 2 labels from boxes where the weight figures matched my cross-system file. I took the terminal printout. I took a chain of custody page whose recipient field had been replaced by a black square. I took the cassette recorder because it had become more valuable than any page. I wanted my phone to prove the digital failure, but they had taken it. So I used the watch. It was dead again, truly dead this time, as far as I could tell, but when I shook it, the black screen briefly showed a grid of empty image thumbnails. That was enough. I wrapped it in the packet with a strip torn from my undershirt and wrote on the outside with a pen I found clipped to a clipboard labeled Archive Migration Team, Do Not Remove. Matt Keir, not fraud, disposal route, is place, digital fails, analog partial. My handwriting looked like someone else's. I needed a place to leave it. Not there. Not in the archive where it would be swallowed into contradiction. Near a route marker. Near a threshold. Somewhere another person might pass before the place decided whether to include them. That was when I heard the voice. It came from beyond a wall of file boxes, faint and almost mechanical. Tess, Light 4, hold your line. I froze. The cassette recorder remained in my hand. Its reels turned silently. The voice was not coming from it. If you are hearing me, do not answer in the open. Human, not clean, not close. The words rode under static, stretched, and then compressed, like a radio signal traveling through water and bone. Hello, I whispered. The archive went still. Every drawer stopped. Every paper sound ended. The mistake was immediate and total. I had answered in the open. Something shifted above the shelves where there was no ceiling. Not a body. Who wait? Attention. The black overhead lowered without moving, the way a predator's interest changes the air before it changes position. The voice returned, quieter. Not there. I clutched the proof packet to my chest. A route marker stood at the end of the lane. I had missed it before because it looked like a broken signpost from an ordinary facility. Black arrow, white plate, green border. The text had been scraped down to fragments. Return, stable blue. Under the sign, someone had scratched a symbol into the glossy floor. A circle with a line through it. Not a map symbol I knew, but human. Made by a hand. Desperate enough to repeat. I crouched and tucked the packet behind the marker base, wedging it where the floor had not quite sealed around the metal. The recorder hissed. For a second, my own voice came out of it from several minutes earlier, saying my name. Then, another voice spoke over mine. Matt Keir. I nearly dropped it. The voice from the shelves had said my name. Not through the recorder. From the archive itself. I backed away from the marker. The packet stayed where I had placed it. I could still see the corner of my torn shirt around it, pale against the brown gloss. Then, the green wall beside the marker brightened. A line appeared in it, thin and yellow-white like the line in the fossil slab. For one impossible second, I thought I had found the way back. The line opened onto the transfer chamber. Eek, I saw it. Ooh, brushed metal. Grated floor. The fossil slab. The blue line. The sealed door. I ran. The line narrowed. The chamber tilted sideways, as if reflected in water. I reached for the blue circle painted on the grating, but my hand struck warm green material. No opening. No chamber. Only a wall with the afterimage of metal fading inside it. Behind me, the route marker now pointed in the opposite direction. The proof packet was gone. No, not gone. Moved. I saw it 20 feet away, tucked behind another marker I had not passed, the pale cloth corner waiting as if I had placed it there carefully. The voice whispered again, farther off. Bring it if you want it found. I understood then that leaving evidence was not the same as escaping evidence. The archive did not destroy things. It assigned them to routes, and mine had not been accepted yet. I do not know how many times I tried to leave the packet. 3 is the number I can defend. The first was behind the return marker. The second was inside a cracked archive bin labeled External Disclosure Review because some part of me still believed labels exerted moral pressure. The third was under the beige terminal where the cable entered the wall and made the green material flicker around it like a vein under skin. Each time, the packet moved. Never while I watched. Never dramatically. I would look away because of a sound, a motion, a change in the green light, and when I looked back, the packet would be somewhere else. Not stolen. Routed. That was the word I kept hearing in my head, the word that had ruined my life before I understood. It was a place. Route exclusion complete. The archive would not let the evidence leave, but it also would not keep it still. I began to think of the packet as another part of me, the place had not finished deciding about. The voice came and went. Sometimes it was almost clear. Not the bright lanes, the STA. Sometimes it was only pressure in the shelves, a pattern under static that made my body turn before my mind admitted there had been a sound. It did not guide me exactly. It corrected me. When I stepped toward the cleanest green corridor, a burst of static would crackle from some hidden point in the file stacks. When I approached an opening that looked like a service route, the cassette recorder in my hand would click as if reaching the end of a tape, though it kept turning. I did not trust the voice. I trusted the fact that everything else in that place seemed to prefer I trust myself. That made the voice the least suspicious thing available. I took the packet with me. The archive changed as I moved. The file boxes thinned, replaced by larger objects, dented chemical drums, cracked evidence lockers, stacks of sealed coolers, broken monitor housings, white containment bags printed with numbers that had browned and blurred. Some bags were empty. Some held shapes I did not look at long enough to name. Once I saw a row of old staff helmets lined along a shelf, each with its visor fobbed from the inside. A corridor opened to my right, where no corridor had been before. Its walls were not the bright modular green of the first passages. They were darker, rougher, the green broken by bark-like columns and strips of fluorescent light hanging overhead. Tree trunks rose through the floor and disappeared into black. Moss crawled over office carpet remnants. A sign bolted to one trunk read, "Forest Corridor, not obsolete, do not use for return." Someone had tried to cross out "do not" and written "never" beneath it. I stood at the edge and looked down that impossible grove. The trees were arranged too evenly, each trunk where a column should have been. The fluorescent lights continued into the distance, buzzing over roots, old desks and sheets of paper pinned under moss. The forest had a center line. The voice hissed from somewhere ahead of me, not in the forest. Left of obsolete. I did not enter the forest. Not then. I went left. The path narrowed into a lane of luminous walls and glossy brown floor. The green was weaker here, less clean. The walls had dents, or memories of dents. Human systems had left marks, arrows painted over other arrows, root tags layered 3 deep, a blue circle half visible under a smear of brown gloss. Twice I passed the same hand-scratched symbol from the return marker, circle and line, each one cut into a different surface. The proof packet grew damp against my chest. Not wet. 1B. The cloth wrapping darkened, and the paper inside softened at the edges. I stopped and checked it, because panic can become practical when given an object. The manifest was still readable. The terminal printout had blurred, but not vanished. My dead watch remained dead. The cassette recorder's red light had gone out, but the reel still turned with no sound. I pressed stop. The button would not depress. The recorder was no longer recording because I had asked it to. It was recording because the place was pressing against it. A pale sign appeared ahead. Unlike the others, it was not bolted to the wall. It stood on a metal stake driven into the floor material. The sign face was scratched almost blank, but one line remained clear. Maintain blue line clearance. Below it, the floor changed. The glossy brown surface gave way to a circular marking, not painted on top, but embedded beneath the shine, blue, worn, broken in places, unmistakable. My breath stopped. The circle was not complete. One side disappeared under green wall. The other passed through a black opening that had no frame, only an absence between 2 luminous blocks. Blue line clearance. The transfer chamber had a blue line. I walked toward it with the caution of someone approaching an animal that might be asleep. At the edge of the circle, my ears filled with pressure. That was the word my body supplied. Not because the circle was home, but because it was a rule I recognized. The first rule: the room, the slab, the door, the path back, maybe, if return meant anything here, and if R Epoch had left that possibility for someone like me. The voice crackled from the dark opening. Not return. Relay. I hated it then. Not for being frightening, but for being precise. Who are you? I whispered. Static. Who are you? The green around the opening brightened, then dimmed. For a moment, the dark beyond it cohered into a corridor with shelves, then a service tunnel, then something like open water under daylight, pale platforms extending over an ocean in a maze without walls. The vision vanished so quickly, I could not tell whether it had been a place, a file, or the space testing which category would make me move. The voice returned. Hold proof low. Say name. Not loud. I crouched at the broken blue circle and placed the packet against the base of the sign. My hand shook so badly that the cloth came loose. The torn manifest slid halfway out. I pushed it back in with 2 fingers and added the cassette recorder on top. Then I thought of the earlier tape. Keep the tape moving. I took the recorder back. No. The packet needed analog proof. I put it down again. No. I needed the voice. I almost laughed, kneeling there between rules I barely understood, trying to decide whether evidence should travel without me or stay in my hand until I died with it. In the end, I did the only thing I could justify. I opened the packet and split it. The terminal printout, 1 disposal manifest, and my handwritten note went under the sign. I wrapped them in the cloth and shoved them as far into the base seam as I could. My dead watch went with them, face turned outward. If anyone found it, they would find a device that had failed in a way devices should not fail. I kept the cassette recorder and 1 label from the archive. Animal remains, mass correction. Root exclusion complete. A stupid label. A small label. The kind of thing I could hold in 1 fist. I leaned close to the packet and whispered, Matt Keir, Disposal, Reconciliation, Analyst. environmental recovery and materials accounting. This is not fraud. Disposal route is place. Digital fails. Analog partial. The blue circle pulsed once, not light. Recognition maybe. Or pressure. Or my own blood in my ears. The packet stayed. I waited. It still stayed. For the first time since the chamber, I felt something like relief. Then the route behind me changed. I did not hear it move. I felt the loss of space the way you feel someone step into a room behind you before they speak. When I turned, the corridor I had used to reach the blue circle was gone. In its place stood a wall of luminous green, perfectly smooth except for a thin vertical seam that glowed yellow-white for less than a breath and then sealed into material. No archive lane. No way back to the path I had understood badly enough to follow. The only opening left was the black gap inside the broken blue circle. From inside it came the voice. Closer now. Good. Bring rest. No, I said. The word sounded brave because it was short. A pause. Then softer. Then stay open. I do not know what that meant. I still do not. I only know that after the voice said it, the dark gap stopped looking like a hole and started looking like a distance. A passage, maybe. A throat. A route that had not decided whether I was permitted to be an object moving through it or only another record being filed. Then something behind the green wall breathed. Inhale. Hold. Scrape. The sound was not loud. That was why my body believed it before my mind did. Loud things can be machines. Loud things can be rooms settling, pipes flexing, metal expanding somewhere far away. This was too measured for machinery and too heavy for a human chest. It entered the wall as pressure first, then rhythm, then the suggestion of mass moving without giving me a location. Inhale. Hold. Scrape. The black gap ahead lengthened. Not widened. Lengthened. The route pulled itself straight, the way a corridor becomes a sight line when every bend is removed from it. The green blocks on either side smoothed their seams. The broken blue circle brightened along the portion nearest my knees, and the dark inside the opening seemed to draw back so that whatever looked through it would not have to guess where I was. Straight lines make you easy. I looked at the gap and understood that it was not a way out yet. It was a place being faced. The breath in the wall stopped holding. Scrape. The green surface behind me did not crack. It did not open. It changed its opinion of itself. A shallow vertical dent appeared where no seam had been, then another above it, then a row of them at heights that made my mind assemble a body from absence, a narrow head too high for a person, a backline where the wall seemed to lean away, a jointed shadow crossing the green without ever becoming an animal. The fluorescent lights I could not see began to buzz. One by one, somewhere to my right. I turned. The forest corridor had returned. Not in the same place. Or the same place had remembered it could be forest. A dark opening stood where smooth wall had been, and beyond it rose trunks in a line so regular they were almost architectural. The first fluorescent tube hung low over roots that had grown through office carpet. It flickered, green-white, then steadied. Under it, a desk sat half-sunk in moss, drawers open, file labels curling from the bark of the tree behind it like name tags on living columns. The entity did not move toward me. The space did. The black gap ahead became cleaner, straighter, brighter. The forest opening remained crooked. Not safe. Not inviting. Not a return route. But it was not currently being looked through. I understood that too late and just early enough. The recorder in my hand clicked once. The voice said, not from the gap now, but from the tape, thin and warped. Not where it is. Where it faces. I went into the forest. The first step crossed something I felt more than saw. The glossy brown floor became carpet, under dirt, under resin, under roots. My foot sank half an inch, then struck hard material beneath. The air changed to damp paper, bark, old plastic, and the mineral smell of the green corridors underneath all of it. Trees rose on both sides in perfect spacing, every trunk placed where a support column should have been, each one wrapped with cable ties, vines, and old root tags. The fluorescent lights continued overhead into blackness. There was still no ceiling. The tubes hung from nothing, buzzing in a line over the center of the path. Their light made the trunks look yellow for a second. Then my eyes corrected, and everything became the same, impossible green again, moss, bark edges, the underside of desks, the strips of tape on filing cabinets half grown into roots. I passed an office chair with ferns through the seat. A copier stood between two trees, its paper tray full of leaves cut to letter size. On one trunk, beneath a patch of luminous bark, someone had carved a circle and line. Beneath it, another hand had written, "Do not run where it can count you." Behind me, the opening narrowed. Not closed, narrowed. The space wanted me to know it could. The breath came again, this time from the line of fluorescent lights. Each tube trembled as the pressure passed beneath or above or through them. Inhale, hold. Years, scrape. The scrape did not touch the floor. It touched the arrangement of the floor. Roots shifted aside along the center line. Desks angled their open drawers away from something I still could not see. The tree columns ahead seemed to align, then misalign, as if the forest were trying to decide which way a body larger than any corridor should be allowed to look. For 1 second, between two trunks, I saw a head shape made only by negative space. Long. Low. Wrong by the joints. Then the green light over-resolved it, and it became branches, cabinet handles, hanging roots, nothing. I kept moving, not running. Running would make a countable pattern. I believed that with the part of my mind that had already accepted too much. I walked bent forward, one hand on the cassette recorder, the other closed around the label. The proof I left behind was behind me. The proof I kept was in my fist. My name was still in my mouth, though I was afraid to say it again. The forest corridor bent left. When I looked left, there was a path. When I looked straight, the trunks lined up into a wall. When the pressure behind me shifted, the left path became too open, and a smaller gap appeared between two desks to my right. Not where it is. Where it faces. I crawled through the gap. Moss brushed my face. File paper tore under my knee. A drawer slid closed by itself beside my ear, not fast, not dramatically. Patiently. The recorder kept turning. The voice did not speak again. Behind me, something exhaled, and the forest corridor arranged itself into a straight line. I was not in that line anymore. That may be the only reason I am still speaking. If someone finds the packet, understand what it means. Not that I escaped. Not that I solved it. Not that R Epoch has one hidden room where the bad paperwork goes. There is no room. There is a system of places, or one place wearing systems, and they have been feeding it everything they needed not to explain. Bodies, files, bills, drives, people. Maybe me. The cassette recorder is still running as I say this. I can hear the reels, though the red light died a long time ago. The label is in my fist. The forest corridor is opening ahead, but not into trees anymore. The trunks thin into luminous columns. The carpet becomes the glossy brown floor again. The roots run forward in parallel lines like cables toward a green opening that is getting brighter now. The voice is waiting. It is not kind. I need to say that. It is human, or human-shaped, or made from someone human enough that I keep wanting it to be rescued. That want is dangerous. I know that. I also know it is the only sound in here that has ever told me not to do something stupid. Behind me, the lights are going out one by one, not breaking. Being faced, I am going forward. Not because I trust the voice, because the route I came from is gone, and the proof I could leave behind is behind me, and the thing in the walls has taught the space how to look. Whatever happens next should happen to someone who still remembers his name. Matt Keir, Disposal Reconciliation Analyst. R Epoch did not destroy the evidence. They put it somewhere evidence could survive without ever becoming clean. The opening is getting brighter now, but not yellow. The yellow is only what happens when your eyes cannot accept the first second. This is green. This has always been green. I am going in. Thank you for listening. SAURIAN is not just another R Epoch incident. It is the place where R Epoch sends the things it needs to disappear. Not disposal fraud. Something worse. A liminal disposal space where evidence can survive without ever becoming clean, and where getting a message out may be harder than staying alive. Subscribe for more R Epoch stories and tell me what you think is waiting deeper inside SAURIAN. The route did not close by accident, and I may not be the only one still in here.